Thompson.
And I'm Cameron Simpson.
And we're here to continue 80s Made, this time with Back to the Future, which, if you heard of Back to the Future, then you know how famous this film is in regards to pop culture. A lot of people love it, myself included, as well as Cameron. This is a film that a lot of people, most people in particular, do not have problems with, because this is like close to perfection in terms of sci-fi films. And in terms of sci-fi films, I would definitely put this on, if I had to make a list of like my top 10 favorite films, of science fiction films in particular, from the 1980s, I would be shocked if I did not add Back to the Future in that list, because it has everything that you would want in a good science fiction film like this. You have time traveling, you have a time machine that is literally a car. What else could you not ask for something like that? You have a great cast, in particular Michael J. Fox as Marty and Christopher Lloyd as Doc Brown. They are definitely the heart and soul of this trilogy. A great score by Alan Silvestri, and the great direction given by Robert Zemeckis, and this movie was also produced by Steven Spielberg. Just everything about it is just close to perfection, and it's easily one of the best movies from the 80s.
Yeah, I personally, I don't honestly know what to say that hasn't already been said about this film. I'm sure a lot of people know just really what it is, how much of an impact it had back then, what it has now, and honestly, I still think to this day that it really lives up to its reputation. It is an instant classic in a lot of people's minds, including my own, although personally I do prefer the sequel just a little bit more myself, but for reasons we'll get into later. As for this one in particular, I do very much like the time travel aspect of this film, and the fact, like Brevin said, it's not just a time machine, it's also a car, specifically a DeLorean, because Doc always said, I figured if you're going to put a time machine in a car, why not add some style, huh?
Yeah, which is perfect, really. What's even more hilarious is when Marty eventually goes back into the past, and he when he just runs into that barn. The family who lives there mistakes it for a spaceship, and they think that he's an alien, which is hilarious.
Yeah, really. And as far as alien designs for the comic book strip that they referenced, that the family looked at to compare it, it actually wasn't a pretty similar design. I could see why they got that interpretation.
Yeah. But before we go any farther into our review, I have my good friend Rachel from Rachel's Reviews. I'm so happy to have her back on this channel. The last time she helped us out for a video was on Spider-Man 2 a few months ago, and I'm so happy to have her back, and it's really great to have her talking about Back to the Future with us. So before we discuss our thoughts on Back to the Future, it's your turn, Rachel.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Rachel from Rachel's Reviews, and I'm so excited to be here on Devin's channel to talk about one of my favorite movies of all time. It's Back to the Future from 1985, directed by Robert Zemeckis, produced by Steven Spielberg. And I think this movie is just about a perfect blockbuster film. It's so satisfying. It's got such great characters. It has something to say. It's got great music. Just pretty much every way around, it's a very, very satisfying film. And Michael J. Fox is so great as Marty. His friendship with Doc is really fun. Of course, going back to the future and getting to meet his parents and helping them to get back together before time runs out. It just creates such a compelling narrative that you're invested in, and how's he going to do it? What's going to happen? And I think that it's something that we can all relate to, because part of growing up is coming to understand that your parents were just normal people that were trying to figure things out every day, that they weren't these authority figures that you think of it when you're a child. And Marty gets to see that in a whole real way with seeing his parents as teenagers. and helping them to get together. Of course, you have all of the great characters and performances. I mean, Crispin Glover is George McFly. I mean, he gives such an awkward, strange performance that it really works. You've got Lea Thompson as his mom, Lorraine, and it ends up being a big surprise, Lorraine, to him. And getting them together is really fun. You have Tom Wilson as Biff, and he's like the classic bully. I love the ending of the film. Kind of, it's a perfect lead way into the next film, which is a lot more dicey. The next film is a lot darker, but I just love this film. I love the Huey Lewis and the News songs. The Alan Silvestri score is great, it's the design of the DeLorean was perfect. The flux capacitor, all of that, it's just iconic at this point. I love Back to the Future. It's one of my all-time faves. So thanks so much for letting me get to talk about this film, and good luck with the rest of the review. Thanks so much.
So in the opening of the film, we figure out what most of Marty's life is like outside of high school. He does have a great relationship with Jennifer, and when he does get home, we find out what his home life is like. His dad is a complete coward, and he even stated that he doesn't like confrontations. Biff is a fucking asshole.
What are you looking at, butthead?
He completely totaled his car, and we find out that Marty's mom is depressed and she's an alcoholic. And that's when you begin to, you feel sorry for Marty, and you totally relate to him, because he feels like that's his entire home life is it's just not perfect. But later, when he eventually goes into the 50s, that's when he begins to learn more about his parents, and then when he eventually make things better for them and for their own lives and for his own, that's when you feel so much satisfaction when he does come back to 1985. And that is just beautiful to me. So do you think that the reveal of the DeLorean still holds up after all these years?
I would definitely say, from my own viewing experience, that yes, the reveal is just summed up perfectly with the trailer in the front of the mall when Doc and Marty meet up, and this big smoke screen that conceals the car. And then just this big reveal, it's just unbelievable.
Not to mention Alan Silvestri's score. And when it comes to Alan Silvestri, I mean, he's definitely at his A game here. I've always loved Alan Silvestri's music, from this to Predator, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Forrest Gump, Castaway, The Avengers. He is a fucking master in film scores, and he's definitely one of my personal favorites, right next to John Williams and Danny Elfman. And in terms of Oscars, I'm just the fact that this film score wasn't even nominated for an Oscar is absolutely baffling to me, and I'm just like, why?
Well, I honestly myself am a little surprised that it wasn't even nominated, but I guess given the Oscars being the just high valued and privileged type of reward that a movie can get in any regard, whether it's film or best score or anything like that, I guess it's a lot to shoot for, so it's a little hard to tell what could really make the cut, what really doesn't, but it's also an honor nonetheless.
Yeah. And speaking of John Williams, he's been nominated for more Oscars than you care to count.
Yeah, I'd imagine he is, with all his work on Star Wars and various other movies that I'm sure we're all very proud of him for, and I hope he keeps going for years to come.
Amen to that. Marty and Doc test out the DeLorean, and he gives the film's best line.
My calculations are correct. When this baby hits 88 miles per hour, you're gonna see some serious shit.
While they're testing the DeLorean, the effects used when the car is going back in time still holds up even after 30 plus years. Just when the car disappears and it leaves the fire tracks, that is just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, no words, if you ask me, can really describe just the experience. I can't myself even imagine what that must have felt like when that movie came out in theaters. I mean, I'm sure it really impacted a lot of people, but it just was like undescribable, I'm sure.
Yeah.
How good it really was.
And I actually saw this in a theater with my buddy Austin for its 35th anniversary, and it was incredible.
After that moment with the amazing effects of time travel, we get like this next scene where the Libyans that Doc Brown had paid off to get the plutonium necessary to achieve time travel, they show up and they pretty much shoot Doc. Like,
yeah, because I mean, they kill off basically one of the main characters, and that's literally in the first few minutes of the film, and like I like how they get us to care about these characters, because we do, and like I mentioned before, Marty and Doc Brown are the heart and soul of these movies. When it comes to Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd, they have excellent chemistry together, because they had this great friendship, almost like a father-son type of relationship, and it's just amazing to always watch these two on screen.
Yeah, I honestly couldn't agree more with that. Although at times I myself kind of thought of them more as sort of like a funny uncle and nephew sort of relationship, but I guess it depends on the person.
Yeah, because when he even like calls he even calls Doc his uncle when he's like when Lorraine is there. I mean, when he was back in 1955. So yeah, you definitely yeah.
Right after the Libyans shoot Doc, Marty basically makes a run for the DeLorean, still being chased, and he accidentally, like, sets the time circuits for the date that Doc had put in earlier, which was 1955, and when he tries to escape him by going 90 miles an hour, he accidentally goes back in time, and next thing you know, one second he's in 1985, the next he's in 1955 in a cornfield and heads straight for a barn.
Yeah,
yeah, I mean,
just like, yeah, I mean, that was definitely a good way to like build up like him like going back to the 50s. I mean, him being chased by the Libyans, and you have Silvestri's amazing score, and of course when the DeLorean hits 88 miles per hour and him going back to 1955. And that specific date is kind of important because, I mean, the November 5th, 1955, Doc mentioned that was the day he came up with the idea for the flux capacitor, which is what he said, quote, makes time travel possible.
Yeah, I never get tired of him saying that. I mean, it's just a nice set of delivery.
So I like how like Marty is trying to get used to the idea that he's in the 50s, and he runs into like interesting characters. I mean, of course he meets the 50s version of his dad. Speaking of which, Crispin Glover as George McFly, I mean, he is excellent in this film. When we first see him in 1985, I mean, like I mentioned before, he is a complete coward who doesn't like confrontations, and I always liked when he was like watching TV, and he has this hilarious
yeah, I mean it to me that is just
amazing. That is just hilarious.
And I guess you could also say in some ways maybe just a little pathetic, but you know, that's just kind of what he turned out to be after all these years.
Well, yeah. And of course, Biff. What are you looking at, butthead? I mean, and even in the 50s, he was still an asshole.
Yeah, I mean, really, there was, like, no change for him whatsoever.
And how he interferes with his parents' meeting, I mean, he sees his dad basically spying on his mom. He's a peeping Tom.
Yeah. Which is really weird, because they actually didn't know what really happened that day. They thought it was a number of different things,
but his dad turning out to be a peeping Tom was like the last thing that he probably expected. Yeah, and he saves George from being hit by Lorraine's dad's car, and of course, I mean, instead of Lorraine falling in love with George, she ends up falling in love with Marty, and it leads to awkward moments with Lorraine and Marty. And the idea of the main character's mother falling in love with him, it's interesting, it's embarrassing, and hilarious all at once. Just, I don't know how they managed to pull it off, but somehow they did, and it works. Yeah. And I think it still does.
Yeah, it works, I think, to a degree, but honestly, I just don't think there's really even a word for what that is. I mean, it's great for a classic. I get where they were going for there, but a part of me just feels like, I don't know, maybe it crosses some kind of line, and not just the line of the space-time continuum.
I mean, of course, it starts to mess up the space-time continuum. The space-time continuum because because of him interviewing. I mean, because of him saving George, he begins to make things worse for his own life, because when he meets up with Doc and eventually convinces him that he's from the future, that's when he looks at that photo of him and his siblings. He realizes that his brother's head is slowly fading away, and he realizes that because of that, his existence is now at stake. And now it feels like they're building tension because of that. Because after seeing that photo, it feels like there's real stakes and danger, and it's just like, after that, you immediately care for Marty.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't see how you couldn't have at this point, but I'm glad that there's points in this movie where you eventually go to care for him if you don't already. And as weird as some parts of this movie can be, I still think of it as a timeless classic, no pun intended. And basically, it is still, I think, very much worth checking out, even after all these years.
So Marty is doing everything that he can to try to get his parents to go to the Enchantment Under the Sea dance. George doesn't want to go, and Marty comes up with a clever way to convince him with him wearing his radiation suit that he came in waiting for his test of the time machine with Doc. And he's like, "My name is Darth Vader. I am an extraterrestrial from the planet Vulcan." That is just hilarious. I mean, still, after all these years, that holds up. And I like how that immediately, for some reason, changes George's mind. He's like, "Last night, Darth Vader came down from planet Vulcan, and he told me that if I didn't take Lorraine out, that he'd melt my brain."
Yeah, I mean, seriously, that is one of the most hilarious things I think I've ever heard in a movie before. Darth Vader came down from planet Vulcan and would melt my brain? That George basically tries to get Marty's advice about how to ask Lorraine out, and even though he tries to compliment her and do the best he can to get her to go with him to the dance, it basically fails miserably, mostly because of Biff.
I mean, because of Biff showing up, and how this later builds up the skateboard scene. I always loved that. I mean, with Marty tripping him and then sucker punching Biff, just and he takes apart this kid's scooter and he rides it like a skateboard, and this kid is blown away. He's like, "Whoa, what is he doing?" And he tricks Biff and his gang into running into a manure truck.
Yeah, I mean, seriously.
And right when they're saying, "Shit!"
Yeah, and even right before that, I mean, there's this little stunt scene where Marty basically is about to get hit by their car again, which, if you ask me, he seems to have a knack for that in these films. But anyway, he basically is skateboarding right to their car. He jumps off the skateboard and, I guess you could say parkours his...
In a way.
His way through the car, back onto the skateboard, turns around, and then they head straight for a manure truck.
and they're literally in deep shit. But of course, Lorraine is still in love with Marty, and Marty is still trying his best to try to fix that, and he's trying to like help George actually stand up to Biff later. I mean, because Biff shows up in one scene when right after Lorraine like kisses Marty, and she immediately regrets it. When Biff shows up and basically assaults Lorraine, starts harassing Lorraine sexually, and that's when George comes in, and how everything plays out is so satisfying. Like, he opens the door, at first expecting Marty, but instead he finds Biff, which is something that he was not expecting. And right when Biff tells him to piss off, basically, he's like, no, you leave her alone. And he tries to punch Biff. Biff ends up twisting his arm. Lorraine steps in, and after Biff pushes her, this pisses off George so much, he knocks out Biff with one punch, and that was so satisfying.
Yeah, I mean, I know I've said this probably a lot this video, but there are just a lot of moments in this film that I honestly can't put into words, just how good or what some of these events like are. But in this case, I love that scene every single time. And honestly, I couldn't think of a better way to have George, just toughen up and start feeling better, about himself in life, a little self-confidence. There's just a lot to say about that one scene. It's amazing, if you ask me, just how much even a couple of seconds in film can really make history.
Oh, definitely. And how everything plays out with Marty playing the guitar and hoping that George and Lorraine will eventually kiss. And right when someone butts in and, next to George and takes Lorraine instead, right when we see Marty slowly fading away from existence, it feels like, you want George to like make his move in order to save Marty without him even knowing that he's fading from existence. And when George finally does step in and he has the confidence to actually make his move on Lorraine and eventually kisses her, that saves Marty. And that's when he has that feeling that things are going to get better for his family. You just feel so much satisfaction. You feel so relieved after George and Lorraine kiss.
Yeah, I mean, that right there for me is the turning point practically the whole film, because we've just been through so much disappointments in some parts, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so much like I guess you could say just higher expectations, or just maybe ideas of a better life for both Marty and his family. And now I feel like in that one moment we finally start to get something.
And right when he was ready to leave after Lorraine and George kiss, the scene with him like playing Johnny Be Good is just amazing, and him like playing like certain like heavy metal notes just is amazing, and everybody is like, what is he doing? Especially when he's going crazy with the guitar, and and he's clearly having a ball. And how everything like plays out in the finale, with Doc trying to like execute this plan to send Marty back to 1985. There's like a few obstacles that they had to come across with the equipment like getting all like screwy, and Doc doing his best to repair it just in the nick of time. The DeLorean not being able to start, and it feels like there's stakes in this finale, and it's almost like, well, are they going to run out of time? And just at the last possible second, Doc manages to get the equipment prepared, and Marty has enough power necessary to go back to 1985. And how the rest of the film plays out, with Marty going back to try to warn Doc about the Libyans, but it turns out that he was too late. But not quite, because it turns out Doc survived due to wearing a bulletproof vest, because at first he didn't want to listen to Marty's warning because he was afraid of like damaging the space-time continuum, but mostly because of like the bond that he shared with Marty in the 50s and in the 80s. He's like, I figured, what the hell? I just love that.
Yeah, and it really shocked me the first time I saw that. You know, I thought history was just repeating itself all over again, especially when Marty kept trying over and over and over again in less than 4 minutes before the lightning strike to tell Doc what was going to happen to him. He even wrote him a letter. He tears it to shreds. He tries to tell him right out. He keeps getting interrupted before things go haywire.
And he thought that going back 10 minutes before, he traveled back originally,
would give him enough time to like go back early and warn him before everything happened, but the DeLorean wouldn't start when he got back. So it was like the universe was against him, just trying to save a friend. But then we find out that not only is Doc alive, but he survived because he had eventually decided to repair the letter that Marty originally wrote, trying to warn him about his upcoming death at the hands of the Olivians 30 years later. And Marty goes, what about all that stuff about messing up historical events, the space-time continuum? And Doc's like, well, I figured.
What the hell?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
it's just really satisfying. And with Marty waking up the next day and he finds out everything for his family has changed for the better. I mean, his siblings have better jobs. The relationship between his parents are perfect because because going back to the 50s, he made life better for his family, and he's rewarded with the truck that he wanted. And just when he's about to kiss Jennifer, that's when Doc steps in with the new upgraded DeLorean, which is now powered by the Mr. Fusion reactor, which I think works a lot better compared to plutonium because it adds a new upgrade to the car. And he tells them about the future and their kids. And the last lines of the film, I absolutely love them.
Yeah, I mean, it's my personal favorite line in the entire Back to the Future franchise. And that includes, out of all three of them, basically. It basically goes, hey, Doc, you gotta back up. We don't have enough room to get up to 88.
Roads?
Where we're going, we don't need roads.
I want the DeLorean flying back and then turning back and flying towards the screen. That is a perfect way to finish the film. And there's a big debate on how Marty's parents don't recognize him as their friend who set him up in the 50s. I mean, a lot of people have debated about that, and I'll go back and forth on that, but to be honest, I really just don't care because he made life better for his family, and that's more than enough satisfaction for me personally. When it comes to Back to the Future, it's definitely in the category of perfect 80s movies, right next to Ghostbusters, Die Hard, The Terminator, and Empire Strikes Back, Shining, you name it. It's in that category of perfect 80s movies. Mm-hmm. And it's a movie that I can watch over and over again without getting bored of it. Everything about it works. The direction, the cinematography, the effects, the casting, and how it holds up all these years later. I love Back to the Future. It's a perfect film. I have no problems with it. I absolutely love this movie. And I'm going to give Back to the Future an A+.
Hallelujah. 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 Hallelujah.
Yeah. I personally also agree with Brevin's rating of this film. I think, especially for its time, it was a movie really ahead of anyone's expectations. And I also have good memories of it, not just for the films itself, but I also enjoyed when I was a kid the Back to the Future ride at Universal Studios.
So did I, and I got to ride that right before they took it down. I've
me
always,
too.
I loved that back then.
Yeah, I got to ride it myself, and it was just epic. I couldn't put into words, and I personally am extremely grateful that most of the DVD, Blu-ray, or other copies that I've seen since then, after the ride was taken down, that they included it as a digital version in the special features of most of their DVD and Blu-ray copies.
And that is just so satisfying.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a trip for nostalgia for anyone who's been on that ride, a good way of knowing what people went through for those who hadn't, and I just consider that a gift that I'm really glad they decided to put.
Definitely. So what did y'all think of Back to the Future? Let me know in the comments below. And guys, thank you so much as always for watching. And thank you, Rachel, for assisting us in this review. And thank you, Cameron, as always, for joining me for these reviews. And it's always a lot of fun to have you here. And we'll come back for 80s May pretty soon with our review for The Terminator. I definitely cannot wait to talk about that.
Yeah, that's a nice pick for the 80s.
And guys, thank you so much as always for watching. Looking forward to doing more videos really soon. And if you want my thoughts on old or new films, of course, you know where to find me.